Wedlow, and I am the host of our show, Televisionation. And I am really happy to welcome a couple of fantastic people, one of which we've had at TVOT in the past, and someone new who I also really admire. So the first one is Steve O, who is the Chief Business Officer and co-founder of the Young Turks, TYT Network.com. And with him is executive producer Malcolm Fleshner, who is, of course, from TYT. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
I'm excited. Let's do this thing. Let's light this candle.
Okay, so much to discuss, right? News is in the hot seat. Politics still going really strong. TYT has been telling that story for a bunch of years now. Quickly, Steve, maybe give us a short history, very short. How many years ago TYT was founded, how big it is. Give us some numbers, if you would, please.
Yeah, so TYT's been around now for 18 years, so since 2002. And I'm not technically a co-founder, but I was there at the founding of it because Cenk and I are high school friends. We go way, way back. So Cenk Uygur is our founder, along with Ben Mankiewicz and I guess David Kohler. But anyway, Cenk was a real visionary behind this, and he launched it in his living room in a really crappy apartment in Hollywood, and he did it with no money, no real equipment, and no know-how. So he launched it then. But interesting story is that he actually started the show on a public access channel in Arlington, Virginia, even before that, so sometime earlier than 2002. And he had someone work on that show, and that person coincidentally is Malcolm Fleshner.
Wow.
Yeah, I then later on, that was the late 90s. I lived in Arlington, Virginia. I also did a cable access show at the same time. And then Cenk, later on, a few years later, moved to Los Angeles, launched the Young Turks, and I got wind of it. I was in San Francisco, and I got a hold of him, and I said, "Hey, I love what you're doing. Let's, I'd love to be a part of it." And I was brought on as a producer.
Yeah.
Well, you guys caught the right comment. TYT has had such a major cultural impact and a generational impact, and I'm proud to be a viewer.
Well, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So when Cenk first launched it, he wanted the show to be funny, sexy, and entertaining, as well as being informative. And their motto, their unofficial motto at the time was they're going to cover important stuff, but they're going to also cover Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton. And then in 2001 we had the disastrous 9/11 tragedy, and then in 2003 when our nation went to war, that's when TYT really took a change, a total turn, because it was very odd to us, and I say us generally because I wasn't really officially part of TYT at the time, but the whole country's media apparatus completely supported the war effort. Everyone did. And anyone who wasn't part of the war cheerleading corps was kicked off the air. So, Phil Donahue at the time had the highest rated TV talk show, and he was he was anti-war, so the show was canceled. Ashley Banfield was a rising young star at CNN, and she was anti-war, and then she was shelved. She was just taken off the air. They didn't even fire her so she can get a job somewhere else. They just kept paying her, but she was just taken off the air. And same with Jesse Ventura, who was a popular former Minnesota governor who was on air, and he was against the war, and they took him off the air. So it was very strange to us that this country would just, just hurtle towards war without asking any questions, let alone the right questions. And the Young Turks at the time wasn't necessarily anti-war. They were just saying, hey, what are the real reasons for going to war? Is it really it's not Saddam Hussein because he didn't do 9/11. Why do we keep saying Saddam Hussein and 9/11 at the same time? So we were asking a lot of these questions, and by asking these questions, we arrived at the conclusion that this war was total BS. And at that moment, we found a huge upsurge in our viewership because there are so many people across America who felt the same way. They felt that they were not getting from the media what they wanted. They weren't getting the right news, the right stories, and the facts. And they just felt there was a massive spin that was way too, quote unquote, patriotic, nationalistic, and pro-war, that and the media, which is supposed to be a watchdog, was essentially the lapdog for the establishment and the power structure. So that's when TYT became a lot more serious, and we started covering a lot more important news and politics, and not as much of the cultural things. But now we cover almost totally just hard news and very little bit of the softer stuff. But that's how we've evolved over the years.
So the world has changed a lot, right? We've been in the midst of this political primary process. TYT continues. It's obviously producing all of its programs constantly. Maybe not all. I'm not quite sure. Tell me, and then we'll move into the politics in a minute. But I wanted to hear, how are you handling this moment when we're still in the political atmosphere that we're in, and you've still got to produce that news. You still got to get those shows out the door. You are staying relevant as ever, but how are you doing that? Just briefly, so people know.
Malcolm?
Well, there's two aspects to that. There's the politics of the COVID-19 crisis and how we're responding to that. And then there's just the technical side of how do you produce a show when you're all self-quarantining essentially in your homes. And I'm not an expert on the technical side of it, but we have managed. We overnight, essentially, we went from being in the studio, shooting our show from the studio, our main show, 2 hours, Monday through Friday, on a Wednesday, to a Thursday show. We cut it down to 1 hour, but we shot it from our hosts' homes with our hosts in their individual homes, respectively. Meanwhile, Cenk, our main host, was off the air because he had a tooth infection that kept him from being on the air. So we had that additional problem. But so our hosts would be in their own homes, our director would be in a different home, the person handling graphics separately, and our tech crew pulled that all together in a masterful way. And it's not like there were no hiccups, and some of the audio was a little echoey, and getting all that together there were some bumps along the road, but we managed it, and it's been a remarkable achievement, and they deserve credit for it, and hands off to them, because right now we're in a time when people are homebound and they're spending more time on the internet. So it's almost like we need to do this even more so than we do typically. And as I mentioned before we came on the air, one of the advantages that we have at TYT, generally speaking, but especially with regard to handling this technical problem, is that we don't use teleprompters. Our hosts research the stories that they cover beforehand. They gather their ideas and their thoughts together and their notes, and then they just speak extemporaneously without a teleprompter. They deliver the story, they tell what the bare bones of the news is of that story, and then they provide commentary on what their perspective is on it. And so they do that without a teleprompter. Once, I don't know if you know who Roy Firestone is, but he's a well-known, legendary sports broadcaster who met Cenk, our main host, once at a social function, and said to Cenk that he really enjoyed the show. But one thing that he found was just incredibly amazing about what he did is his teleprompter reading is so natural. And the reality is that it's so natural because there is no teleprompter reading, and the irony being that Cenk's teleprompter reading is actually not that good. But so our hosts are able to do a show where actual professionals who are in the industry don't realize that they're not using teleprompters. And I think that's a credit to them. And it's something that I think a lot of broadcasters would have a great deal of difficulty with. But it gives us an advantage technically because that's one aspect of a broadcast that we don't have to worry about, is somebody running a teleprompter. And as we saw, perhaps you recall with Joe Biden's most recent effort to do his first live broadcast from his home, somebody was running a teleprompter for him, and he was nudging the person along, like, hey, let's go, So even the entire apparatus of the Democratic Party behind Joe Biden could not get him a remote teleprompter working properly. And so we don't have that problem. And it's a huge advantage for us. And it also means that our hosts are delivering their news and their commentary from, it's not something somebody else has written for them. It's what they believe, and it's heartfelt, and that comes across on camera.
So I would say then that in some ways people can expect that your hosts or your journalists, presenters have a more authentic presence, right? Because we don't have to assume that they're being told what to say, that this is actually, what they believe or what they think is important. So that's basically.
Absolutely. Steve, you can talk about the authenticity that is part of our brand, and it's, we're not nobody tells us what to say. We're not getting notes from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. We're not in cahoots with anybody else. We are just providing our perspective, which is decidedly progressive. It's an unquestionably progressive perspective, but our hosts all have their own, and sometimes they disagree and will argue on camera, which is the kind of thing you don't see often in mainstream shows. Certainly not from you're not going to get a decidedly leftist perspective or people from the left arguing about what is the best approach for progressives to take for a certain issue. Very rarely, occasionally, you'll get someone who is moderately progressive pushing back against a mainstream establishment Democrat, liberal perspective. But two people who are progressive arguing with each other is something you almost never see on TV.
Extremely rare. So tell me a little bit what you guys are doing to restructure your strategy, to how you prioritize everything you're doing over there. News is becoming more important every day. Obviously, everybody is searching for COVID news. I've been doing a lot of reporting myself through Televisionation here, and everybody in the marketing industry, the advertising people, the adventure sports people, they're all noticing that news is one of the most searched on topics other than the virus itself. So how are you retooling in the age of COVID? And how are politics being impacted from your perspective? And how are you telling that story?
So the COVID coverage is, I think, particularly hard because it's a pandemic, and it's, as they would call it, a novel virus, right? So facts are changing quickly. Scientists are gleaning new learnings all the time, and we are trying to cover that in a way that's responsible and factual. But the reality is that there's a lot of room for interpretation on some of the studies and the findings. So to what extent should we be quarantined? Are we doing it enough? Should we have an even more strict lockdown? There are differences in opinion, which I think is very interesting. And what we're really seeing here, though, is the utter failure of leadership from the very top down. And there's a lot of news coverage that we're providing on that. The way other countries handled this crisis is far different from the way we handled it. We have a president who said this is a hoax, it's not a thing, it's not a big deal, and just like the flu, move on with their lives. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe that, and that's going to cause the death of a lot of people. Also, given the economic rampage of this virus, even those who don't get it are impacted by it, right? So people are losing their jobs, they're losing their income. And what's happening is that it, lays bare the absurdities of our healthcare system, right? Where we can't get healthcare unless we have a job, but now we don't have a job. So what are we going to do? So, the argument for Medicare for all has never been stronger. So that kind of goes along with our ideology. So there's a lot of stuff happening here that impacts our coverage.
How do you think the community of politicians are handling this challenge? I mean, you just mentioned Biden with the teleprompter problem, but in terms of how they're handling getting on TV, communicating over the networks, over YouTube, streaming live. I mean, from your professional perspective and knowing how to manage a TV network in a digital first format, how would you say that these politicians are handling this crisis as far as TV and the TV experience goes?
Well, this is hard for someone like Bernie, who really kind of counts on rallies, right? In-person live events. He does extremely well at those kind of things. He's a master at it. In terms of TV appearances, I think he's good on camera too. I think that gruff demeanor actually works for him. But now everything is different. It's harder to appear anywhere in person. It has to be done remotely. You have to have some understanding of how to connect things online and how to, even work the cameras and the mics yourself. So as we mentioned with the troubles that Biden has, some of these older politicians are going to have a harder time. And I would imagine that the younger folks who have a lot more facility with things like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok even, that they would have an opportunity to reach out to new audiences and get their messages across in a new and very innovative way.
Yeah, I would say that the politicians are, we're all in a bind. Everything moves so quickly, and the information that we're getting is confusing often, and people don't know what to do. So you have you have people delivering press conferences from the White House saying that you shouldn't be touching her face, and then the woman licked her fingers to change the page of her notes. So
and then Trump has like so many people around him. Right?
And he's shaking their hands. I mean, so the way Trump is responding, he also can't do rallies anymore, which I'm sure he was looking forward to. So he has converted his press conferences into ersatz rallies, and the Washington press corps has sort of gone along, and they're so desperate, and this is a critique of the Washington, D.C. press corps, they're so desperate to normalize Donald Trump and have him be the kind of president that they want him to be, that they give him credit for taking a more serious tone when he doesn't say it's a hoax, or doesn't say it's the flu, or doesn't say we're going to be over this in a couple of weeks, even though he is still actually saying in just a couple of weeks, like a miracle. I mean, he's genuinely expecting some sort of miracle to happen, and this is all going to go away. So in that regard, I guess the people who criticize him for having evangelical supporters while not being evangelical himself, he is a firm believer in miracles at the very least. But you got Joe Biden. He's responding to this by saying, okay, well, I'm going to start doing live streams now. Give me a week. And then when he starts doing his videos, they are subpar, let's say, not great. And so, but yeah, everybody's responding to this, and there's no precedent for any of this. Nobody knows how we're supposed to respond to this. So everybody's sort of throwing things against the wall and hoping they'll stick and hoping they'll be effective. And some are better than others, perhaps, but nobody's covering themselves in glory under these circumstances, because it's a crisis and a catastrophe, and there's no way to gloss over that.
Have you seen any other politicians getting out there and using it effectively? I don't think I've seen, other than Biden and Bernie. What about Warren? Or nobody? I haven't seen anyone else.
No, I can't think of anybody.
You'd think this would be a great opportunity to, it's kind of like, what was the deal? Like in the Nixon JFK debate, right? The reason why JFK did so well is because he understood the television medium. It's kind of like, people need to know that video is the main communication medium right now, TV, right? And you need to...
Yeah, you know about that debate, though. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no,
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Right? But the funny thing about that debate is that Nixon, right, and Nixon's purported, he was allegedly did better. People who are listening on the radio thought Nixon did better, and people who are watching thought JFK did better. And as a result of that, Roger Ailes went to Nixon and said, look, you need somebody to fix your television performances and help you understand television. And Nixon hired 20-something Roger Ailes, and the rest is Roger Ailes history. That's how Roger Ailes got his start and wound up at Fox News and all. That was eventually. So if only JFK hadn't shown up Richard Nixon so badly in 1960, maybe we wouldn't have had Fox News. That's really speculation on my part, though. Wild speculation. Well, no, the answer is that you're right, though, that nobody seems to be doing really well.
Steve, did you want to add to that? No?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, let's discuss who's doing well. I mean, like I said, TYT, king of the alternative, TV voices online. But I definitely am seeing that we've been watching for a long time the rise of these alternative video news voices. I don't know if you want to talk about your competitors. I don't know if you view them as such, but there are many out there, like Jimmy Dore, who's also been at our show at TVOT in the past. And, should I start naming people, or
sure.
I want to talk about the rise of Rising, right? What do you think of that show? I mean, isn't Crystal Ball, isn't she in the same category as Ashley Banfield and people who had to leave an established network, MSNBC? And, Rising has really taken a lead of their own style with Cigar and Jetty to be able to bring this kind of information out there. I think they're following in your footsteps, but and there are some people who get the online digital first approach. What do you think about them, or what do you think about some of the other voices out there? Kyle Kulinski, of course, Glenn Greenwald just started a new show, I think yesterday. There's so many of them, right? You could go through the whole list. What do you think? Are you guys all going to be the new TV networks of the future? The establishment?
Well, yes, and so I've had this vision for many, many years that I would like to put together
You guys somebody's clicking something, by the way. I have to tell you. If it's clicking, don't click it. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I've had this vision for many, many years that I would have some sort of TV network that would have, just like MSNBC has their lineup of people, we would have our lineup, and our lineup would include Cenk and Anna, it would include Jimmy Dore and Kyle Kulinski, and I would love Christo and Cigar. So this is exactly the right path that we're going, and it's great that we're seeing these progressive voices rising online. So when I first discovered Kyle Kulinski, he was tiny. This is years and years ago, but the moment I first watched him in his raw form with terrible graphics and terrible production quality, and with a YouTube audience of like 800 people, I thought, this kid is a star. Like, he knows his facts. He has a great delivery, and I knew he would rise to the level that he is today. Same with Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is very comfortable with like scripted jokes, and he's a very good comedian on stage. He's outstanding. When he did his political analysis, he was terrific, but he didn't believe in himself. So I always told Jimmy, you don't need to do these like canned jokes in the middle of your political analysis. Like those are fine on their own, but you don't need that. Like, believe in yourself. And I used to, joke with him that I believe in him more than he believes in himself. So he finally went out and built a little studio in his garage, and he's been doing this. And of course, he's fantastic now. And in terms of Christo and Cigar, I've watched a few of their shows. I don't know them as well, but I think they're terrific. And I got to meet with someone who works on their team at an event in DC a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. And they want to do some more collaborations with us. So that's music to my ears. Like, this is exactly what we need to do.
Malcolm?
I hear the clicking too, and I don't know what it is. I turned my audio off, and so I don't think it was me.
I don't hear any clicking at all.
Then it's you.
Okay. Maybe it's somebody listening in. Okay, go ahead.
So I love Rising. I think Rising is a terrific show, and they are definitely following in sort of I'm not saying they modeled themselves on TYT, but that they're a similar ilk. And Kyle and Jimmy and all that. And I think one of the advantages that progressive media has in the current climate is that we have always had to rely on ourselves and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, because we're not dependent on corporate donors, on advertising typically, because the advertisers are not as interested. When you have a decidedly anti-war, anti-corporate, not bias, but perspective, then it's obvious that most corporations aren't going to want to have anything to do with you. And so we've always had to depend on our audience. TYT especially has had to depend on our audience for funding. We did a fundraiser to build our own studio, and our fans gave us $400,000. Our fans, we did a GoFundMe for investigative journalism. They gave us $2 million. We even had a fundraiser for the studio Iguana. It was left on our doorstep with just a little, barely, a little enclosure for it that was tiny. And our fans came up with like $6,000 to build a whole new enclosure for our Iguana, which at the time was like, I was like, that's more than I have for a down payment. But so we have to depend on our fans, and we have to do things cheaply. We do things on the cheap and depend on each other, and because that makes us more nimble, and we have to be, and we have a history of being more nimble. Whereas if a lot of the conservative outlets online have deep pockets and big funders, and that tends to lead to excess, or they want to do things just like the networks do. So they spend a lot more money on more expensive equipment, and they have more backstops. They got more people doing fewer jobs, they got more people to do fewer jobs. We have lots of jobs being done by fewer people. And so in a situation like this, a crisis like this, we can respond more quickly than the traditional networks, for sure. But even often many of the more conservative commentators or outlets that are used to just solving their problems with money. And money is not a solution to this immediate problem of getting up and running quickly with hosts in their own homes, building quick home studios, and everything else that's going along with having to adjust to the coronavirus situation.
It seems like it requires a a fast adaptation skills. You guys have, like I said, a great look. We're going back to the sort of look and feel, but you guys are able to do, I think, a fantastic job. I'm looking at the networks, and these people are from their own homes, and I don't think they're as sophisticated. I don't think they've gotten there. To some extent, I think your advantage is showing, you know?
Yeah, we started out of Cenk's living room, and now we're back in Cenk's living room. This is very comfortable.
Yeah, but you've come a long way. Oh, it's a 180 degrees, from that. I mean, I could bring up just a couple of minutes, or even 1 minute, just John Adirola's show. Shall I show that briefly?
Sure.
Okay, I just want to show that if I can find it. Where did it go?
John Idarola, for those who don't know, is one of the hosts at TYT. He does his own show every day, an hour-long show in the morning called The Damage Report. And he's been doing it from his home with his backdrop of all of his nerdy board games, which he seems proud of for some reason. But, we don't give him too hard of a time about it.
He's a nerd, a very lovable nerd. Yeah.
I thought I'd check. Now, you guys can turn off your camera if you want to, so we can go full screen, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Today, Bernie Sanders is going to appear on The View, and so they put up a little promo of some of the things they'd be asking him about. Take a look at this.
It looks good, but you guys have some lower thirds that come down on there sometimes with Anna's show. It looks very professional. It looks clean. The cameras are looking good. Although, I mean, I'm just talking about the mechanics of your network, but I'm impressed that you've been able to, be digital first, digital adaptive, and the content's interesting. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I am also very proud of that. I think the show looks pretty good. It doesn't look as good as it does in studio. That's fine though. But the content is still very strong, and I find it to be an engaging show. Now, I also watched The Daily Show. I really enjoyed Trevor Noah, but watching him do a show now, have you guys seen it? It is a completely different show, and I love the guy, but wow, it is not good. It's just kind of boring. He's just sitting in his room and he's just making his jokes, but a person making jokes all alone in a room with no laugh track, no graphics to go with this, it just doesn't land, and it's just not a good show. So
did you see
off for
did
him
you see
is
I'm sorry.
huge.
Yeah. Did you see John Kaczynski's new show called Some Good News?
Mm-mm.
He put it together. It's out of his house. He welcomes Steve Carell in there. He's showing off positive news that people are sending him, like clips of people clapping and flickering their lights, and because they're applauding the healthcare workers, or anything that's positive that's going on in the world, which is an uplifting message. So it's and he went from like immediately 300 and something thousand subscribers to, I think I looked yesterday, and it's already 800 and something thousand. Now, he's a well-known brand name, but again, he's choosing to do news. He's doing it from his home. It looks somewhat savvy, but he says there's nobody in the room. It's kind of like we're all reinventing ourselves as video news providers. What do you think? You should take a look, see what he's up to.
I'll check it out. Yeah.
I know Matthew. I'm sorry. Yeah, Malcolm. Sorry, I'm going to call you Matt. Malcolm, you have to get going, right? No, what did I just say?
Well, you called me Matthew.
Okay, sorry.
And then you said I had to get going, but I'm okay. I got another 10 minutes at least.
Okay.
And I got at least 12 more minutes worth of commentary in me.
Okay, so why don't you? I'll click into you. What do you want to comment on?
I have not seen the Trevor Noah show, The Daily Show, but I think what Steve, what he's highlighting there is the difficulty of taking just this giant behemoth of The Daily Show and trying to transport it into Trevor Noah's palatial home. And so not only, this is something my wife has commented on, a lot of these network broadcasters, Jimmy Fallon and the like, or even there was that video that Gal Gadot, I guess, put together of a bunch of celebrities singing Imagine, that they're shooting from their homes, and there are a lot of people who are suffering. This is, we're talking about how we're going to get news to people, but we have to acknowledge that this is a real crisis going on, and the pandemic is going to lead to untold deaths, and we know all that. But then we get to see inside of Jimmy Fallon's home, and he's got this giant yard, and his kids are playing, and he's like, "We're all in this together." And it's like, are we? So that's another problem for these rich celebrities who are now stuck in their homes and don't have their assistants bringing them Danish and people, their makeup people and their hair people and all that other, the whole apparatus that surrounds them at all times and is catering to them. And also in some cases, all their writers who are writing all their material for them and getting them new material constantly. And then we're seeing them sort of exposed as who they really are and without all the artifice. And at TYT, we don't have to worry about that because we already don't have makeup people. We already don't have hair people. Our hosts already do their own makeup and their hair to the extent that they do. I mean, you see John there. There wasn't 2 hours in a makeup chair before he and JR. By the way, that was JR Jackson was the other host we saw there. And so it just allows us to continue doing what we do much more easily. Not that it has been easy, but in ways that a lot of other networks, especially the major networks, they're just not prepared for this. They are woefully unprepared, much like our president, and are flailing to figure out how to address it.
I wonder if this new genre of celebrities dancing or making food or calling celebrities their friends, like Ellen DeGeneres called Michelle Obama, in their homes, is going to become a new genre or a new format, for entertainment, if it's going to continue, or if people are saying that that's enough. But that's just sort of more of a culture commentary.
But it's also a matter of these people have advisors and PR people and publicists and who are very controlling of their image and whatever they say and whatever they do publicly, and this sort of strips away a lot of those layers. So and that leaves the possibility that they can be incredibly tone deaf because celebrities' lives are they are distanced from the rest of us in all sorts of ways, and the literal distancing of people by the self-quarantining is exposing is removing some of those barriers. It's sort of ironic in that regard, and some of them are paying a price for that.
I think we probably can come to a close, but one piece of news actually that came out today, to get back to the sort of the news of politics and how you're going to cover it, is the fact that the Democratic conventions moved to August, right? August 17th. How is TVOT, that's my company. How is TYT covering and going to cover? What's your strategy going forward to cover primaries that are still happening, even and not have been canceled, and or a convention or the lead up to the convention that we assume will happen? Even not even going into depth as to whether or not the election process is going to be at all fair anymore, right? But that's a whole nother discussion. But how is TYT going to handle this sort of uncertainty going forward? How are you going to have to innovate?
Yeah, so we just had this meeting yesterday about what to do about the conventions, because right now it looks like the conventions are in danger of being canceled, right?
Yeah.
So if they're canceled, what do we do? Do we still go forward with reserving, hotel rooms and getting all our equipment ready to be shipped out there, and reserving a space in the venue? There's a lot of preparation that has to be done now for this to be carried out perfectly a few months from now. So unfortunately, we have no real answers. Everything is on pause. And in prior conventions, we worked with YouTube. YouTube was very generous in helping us, get some of these locations secured, and also helping us get a credential to be in attendance. There's a lot of administrative work that has to be done, and they've been great. Everything's on hold, so we just don't know. I mean, we literally don't know how we're going to cover that. But the primaries, we are covering that. We just got a word from our team on the plan for covering the Wisconsin primaries that are coming up. So I think we're going to pretty much do them the way we are doing our current show, which is, everyone's kind of connecting remotely. And it'll be more of a challenge because usually for primary coverage, we go well into the night as the results are coming in. Here, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, are people going to be voting? Are they going to be voting only by mail? So there's so many unknowns. The first this first one that we cover, the Wisconsin primary, will be a good template for what to do going forward or what not to do going forward.
I'd be kind of curious. Did you want to say something, Malcolm?
I'm just very interested to see what's going to happen in Wisconsin, because by any rights, they should cancel the primary. This is, I mean, if are we having a pandemic where people are supposed to be sheltering at home? Because you can see what the difference between what happened in Florida versus Ohio, where Florida didn't cancel their primary and Ohio did, and now Florida's coronavirus cases is skyrocketing, and Ohio, it's not great, but it's not nearly what Florida's experiencing. And we know that poll workers in Florida have gotten the COVID-19, and we don't know, but we don't know how far it spread. So they really shouldn't. But if they do, who's going to vote, and who's going to work? You want to be a poll worker in Wisconsin under a pandemic? And so if not that many people,
it's always old people, right? It's always
then
older.
there tend to be older people, as do voters frequently. So if they don't, so if people aren't voting in person very much, then they have write-in ballots, they have absentee ballots in Wisconsin, but those roll in so slowly. From a coverage perspective, that's not the same as having the results come in. They're still counting ballots in California, so the write-in ballots. So the way you cover it would have to change dramatically, even if they do vote in person. What kind of results can we really give if the in-person voting is not as substantial as it typically is, and you're going to rely on the write-in ballots to determine who the winner is? Covering it, we're not going to be able to, it's quite possible we won't be able to even give a winner, even in a case where there's probably somebody wins by 10%.
What a mess. One last question. Are there any plans to potentially talk to individuals? So not necessarily cover, the political landscape, but cover the sort of after effects or the repercussions of the political situation and the COVID situation. So individuals in their home, how they're handling the fact they can't pay their mortgage. Are they going to be able to get the SBA loan? Are they going to be able to get $1,200 at some point soon in the future? How are they handling toilet paper amongst, a family of 6? I mean, seriously, it's kind of like people in their homes are living the repercussions of the situation they're in. And some of them might have cameras. So what do you think?
Well, we all have cameras.
Yeah.
Right.
So typically, Emma Vigeland is out there, walking the streets and talking to people and getting, great firsthand commentary from regular folks across America. And she's excellent at it. Unfortunately, that's not doable right now under the current situation. What I'm hearing from you is there a plan to make perhaps an invitation to the public to conduct interviews with us, remotely? That's a great idea. Maybe we will. So I'll run it by Emma and her team and see.
Okay, sounds good. That sounds good. I'd be really interested. I've been interviewing a lot of content networks who are like going off to interview athletes in their homes, and it's more mainstream establishment content, but it's happening, and they want to be visible. So I'm sure there are a lot of interesting people. After this show, I'll tell you something. So don't click off. I'll tell you about an interesting service you might want to know about that can help you do that. Okay. All right. I think that's it, guys. We went over time. I know, Malcolm, you need to get going. Steve, you've got family to see, places to go, things to type. So thank you so much for being
places to go. The living room, the kitchen, the backyard. A lot of places to go.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thank you. That's Steve O, Chief Business Officer of the Young Turks, Malcolm Fleshner, Culture Schlock.
Yeah, that was the name of my column. We were talking about how, before the show, about how I used to do a newspaper column. That was the name of my column, and it's still my Twitter feed. That
could be a whole show, seriously, in and of itself, right there. All right, thank you very, very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. It
was great talking to you. Thanks for having us. I had a good time.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
I'm so excited. All right, Tracy Swedlow, host of Televisionation, a show to connect the TV community around the world, because we're kind of like our own nation. Right? Bye.
Bye.
Okay, cut.